opened, which could be concerning, but we also see that it is proportionate. There is a proportionality test, and so I'd be really keen to hear from people, especially those with lived experience and those working in the sector, as to what they see the impact of that would be. We are very concerned about electroconvulsive therapy, and for this reason we will support the bill to the first reading in its current form. I have heard the Minister say in the briefing and tonight in the House that he is flexible about this, and our concerns come about because of our sensitivity to the evidence and the recommendations from the Royal Commission into Abuse in Care. We need to now temper that with the pre-consultation that happened before this bill came up, and I'm hearing that the Minister may be flexible. But we do also have real concerns around the use of ECT that is still allowed under the Act for under 18-year-olds in certain situations, and we want to hear more about what the appropriate consenting process should be and what the safeguards are. The Minister has mentioned seclusion. Our concern here is we understand there are workforce pressures, but we also feel that to use a pragmatic reason to override on human rights as the sole reason is problematic, and so we want to see what can be done around seclusion to strengthen the human rights element and ensure that it is used only in the rarest of circumstances. And the same probably applies to the other treatments that the Minister referred to. In general, I think the bill will be much stronger if we can just ensure that there is greater compliance, and that is because the policy statement refers to a level of compliance needed to achieve its objectives as being very high, and also specifically in the need to secure efforts to secure compliance. Now, those are things that I'm sure can be done through some panel beating of the legislation, and again, Labor will be really listening hard to see where we can strengthen that. It will be around the reporting requirements afterwards, I imagine, after certain powers have been used under the Act, but also in the processes that are used to evaluate people, so that we can be sure that we are really fine-tuning the balance of making sure we take the best care of people when they're in crisis and they need to be kept in a safe environment, not necessarily with their consent, and that they get the care and support afterwards that they need. So with those caveats, Madam Speaker, we do support this to first reading, and I look forward to the many submissions that we will get.
Ricardo Menendez.
God, she was quick. I love the reference to panel beating being mentioned on there. To me, panel beating is about fixing a car body, not fixing or amending a piece of legislation. So it does feel a bit like a very mainstream title for something that isn't a bill, isn't what the average person deals with.
Well, I thought it was about panel beating. My body probably needs more panel beating than the bill. But, you know, I hear what they're saying, and I do actually support updating the bill, the Act. It's an old piece of legislation. My big concern, I noticed Ingrid talked about it, was actually the issue around children and young people and the issue of restraint. That's a huge issue, particularly around the growth of knowledge around autism, ADHD. And we actually do have a muko that's in that level of very aggressive kind of behaviours. And, you know, the police are now involved, and it gets to a point where there's violence against a parent or parents, siblings. What do we do? Do we chemically restrain them? Do we physically restrain them? There are ways of handling it, but it takes a lot of skill. And unfortunately, we're losing those skills to Australia, to overseas generally. And it takes a very deep understanding of cognitive behavioural conditions that run into mental health conditions and how to deal with them. I mean, I used to go to Te Kiwi Health here quite a bit, the mental health unit here at Manukau, and it was interesting because I go into forensics, staff would go, do you need security? I never did, because it all comes down to how you validate a person when they're in that state of mind, and just being calm, sitting. And I've never been attacked by any client that is in a psychotic state, and I have sat with many of them. One of the things is that maybe under stress, staff underpaid, staff too short of staff numbers, it creates a risk, and I am concerned that that risk will end up causing further abuse. When we look at institutional care and disabled people and the abuse inquiry which Matt mentioned, we've got 80% of disabled have experienced some kind of abuse. It's probably higher, but those are the numbers that we've found that came forward. This is not going to end abuse for anybody, and there's no mention of that in the Act about how they will protect the person. Rather, it's about how society can be safe, how staff can be safe. But what about the individual who is at the centre of this? I mean, I remember days, my teen years, when I got restrained after a court case where I was raped, and he was found guilty, but I ended up in psych. And I remember as a teenager, they physically held me down and beat me. And that's what they did back then. This is 1979, 1977. They did that sort of thing. It won't end unless we put within the legislation a way of protecting those clients.
And actually, there are some people who think that's the right way of the approach. And there are some people, and Sean Plunkett is one who does this. Oh, apparently, Tori Whanau, who's ADHD, is the one there. Make it out like it's some was it diagnosis of convenience, not the fact that it was possibly unknown for a very long time and has only, because she's hit a certain point, she's actually gone and seeked it. But some people, when you get having something downplayed, they don't seek treatment, and then they end up in situations where they have a shock diagnosis, 25, 30 years later than they should have been. I mean, Anne Hegarty from The Chase was one who didn't know about an autism diagnosis until I think it would be about 15 years ago, which would have been before she went on The Chase. And
women are underdiagnosed. Women are very underdiagnosed with ADHD and autism. And I have a problem with self-diagnosis. I do believe it needs to be a proper diagnosis, but a woman do present differently. You can always tell an ADHD boy, I can tell the difference between ADD and ADHD. Hyperactive, runs around the place, runs circles around you and just about want to strangle them. But a girl with ADHD doesn't present in the same way, and they often hide the symptoms because they're taught to, because society tells you a girl behaves in a certain way. We expect the boys to be puppy dog tails and, snails and whatever that is, and girls are sugar and spice and all things nice. We don't expect them to be the same. Yeah, exactly. We have these images and stereotypes. Unfortunately, it delays diagnosis. And diagnosis is important for someone to understand. I mean, I'm ADHD. I don't take medication. I don't make it as an excuse for anything, but I call it a superpower. Tori is a very ADHD woman. I can see it a mile off. But she's a good leader, and that diversity can actually work in her favour if people would give her a chance. She's a good leader. She inherited billions of debt. She inherited an aging infrastructure. It's not her fault. No. It's only been in place 2 years. Give her a chance.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, whereas everyone's been trying to take her down. Since the moment she's been elected, like they tried to take down Andy Foster the moment he got elected, that they were trying to take Justin Lester down the moment he got elected, that they were trying to take Celia Wade-Brown because they were upset with the island-based cycle lane.
Before we move on to the next point, Dr. Eric has posted a comment that I disagree with. So he's referring to Harry Tam's Hard to Reach program. I have extended members of my family that have been in and out of gangs. And what Harry Tam is doing is reaching out to hard to reach Māori people to help them come out of the gangs and to prevent them from going to prison by taking much more healthier approaches to mental health. So, this idea that, Harry Tam, he's an ex-member of the Māori mob, therefore he's giving out meth. Or it's like, no, that's not how that program is working. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Huhana, but I've got a real problem with the way how that's been written.
I understand where most people are thinking on that issue, but I would rather Harry Tam be doing a program than Destiny Church. But I don't care who does it. If it stops people with drugs, all good. We can deal with the other issues of them being indoctrinated by a cult or whatever later. But gangs are a reality. They exist. I mean, I didn't grow up with gangs, don't get me wrong, but, I've got whānau. I was adopted into a different kind of family. But when I went back home, found my marae and everything else, I saw patches at Tangi and stuff. And you know what? They behaved appropriately. There was never an issue. In my public service working with gangs, I've never had an issue with any of them. Lay down my boundaries, but show respect, and it gets shown back. We've had a neighbour that protected us multiple times in one of our streets once, ex-gang. And, they're people, they're human. As a kaitaka wainga, which is a listener for the Royal Abuse Inquiry, I can tell you now, I have listened to the abuse stories. As a lawyer, I gather the affidavits. And one of the ones that breaks my heart every single time are those who are in the gangs who are telling me what was done to them as 5-year-olds, what was done to them on those bloody boot camps that people are reviving, what was done to them as children, some of the older ones, Borstal, all of those places. Mate, I got 20 disabled prisoners out of Waikeria prison one time. I got them all out. You know, one has reoffended in 20 years. Why? Because I set up a release program in the community so when they got out, they could be released and they'll never have to go back if they can, you know, get that support. I had a young man who gets used by gangs all the time because he's got no frontal lobe. He's damaged from his parents that were drug addicts when they were 16. Now they're respectable, but he is dealing with all of that. And, you know, he goes in and out of prison. He's harmless. He's a fraudster. But they use it for, you know, the gangs use him, but he's not caught up in the gangs. There's all sorts of people that are in there that don't need prison. We need therapy. If you want to get real about mental health, I'll tell you now, we get real by having a therapeutic approach. We look at the Scandinavian countries, closing prisons because they applied a therapeutic, humane approach. Anyone is capable of ending up in prison for a crime. Anybody. What we need to do is realize that these are people we rehabilitate and get them back out, not to go back in. And the only way to do that, give them dignity, housing, give them a job, give them enough, you know, as Michael Joseph Savage once said, and Norm Kirk said the same thing. You give someone enough money to live on, to have a house, to have a job, to have a home, and a little bit more money to be able to enjoy life with their family. People are happy. When you put restrictions, benefit restrictions on people, the increase in crime is happening. Why? What about that guy that stabbed that woman the other day? I'm hearing arguments all around me because where I live, it is a place that has hotbeds of poverty. Okay? I'm hearing them fighting. We had neighbours fighting. I have to call the cops. I don't like calling them, but I have to for the sake of the babies I'm hearing at the same time. You want to reduce that? That wasn't happening 2 years ago. People were trying to get on. South Auckland is a strong region, but we struggle under poverty and growing poverty. And that is the problem we have. You want to break the cycle. You want to break the gang cycles. The only way you can do that is work with the families, work with their women, work with their children. And
help them leave.
And don't force the children. I know a young woman, when we were doing the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, we went round. When we went round and talked to people, and one was a young child or a young adult, but a daughter of a gang leader. As a result, she wanted to be a cop and she wanted to change the cycle, and they denied her the right to go and do that job because she's the daughter of a gang leader. Now, why? You know, these people want to change things in the same way, you know, that you and I want to make changes.
I mean, I have a friend sorry to interrupt, but I've also got a friend.
Go for it. Lost your sound, Laura. We got you back.
No, we've got a visual, but no
You've got a
audio.
visual. We can't hear you. I don't know what's happening. Well, you know, on this whole issue, I absolutely agree gangs are a problem, but I do not agree with the punitive measures people are wanting to be able to reduce it. I absolutely agree that crime is an issue and it's growing, but that's because of policy. That's because of punitive measures, and we need to try and bring that down.